It feels like everywhere you turn these days, especially online, right? Social media, health blogs, you keep hearing about seed oils and omega-6s, specifically linoleic acid or LA.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge topic.
Yeah, and there's this really dominant story that they're basically bad news linked directly to inflammation, maybe causing a lot of our modern health problems.
That narrative is definitely out there, very strong.
Yeah.
That they're driving chronic inflammation. It's almost treated as fact sometimes.
Exactly. But is that what the actual science shows? So that's our mission today. We want to cut through some of that noise and really dig into some fresh scientific evidence.
Oh, good.
We're doing a deep dive into a study, pretty recent, called Omega-6 and Inflammation, the Framingham Study findings. It just came out in the journal Nutrient.
A very reputable journal, yeah.
And honestly, what we found looking into this, it was pretty surprising. It challenged some of my own assumptions, and I think it might make you, our listener, see things a bit differently too. Okay, so let's unpack that common narrative first. We kind of touched on it, the idea that having more LA, in your diet, in your blood, it just ramps up chronic inflammation.
Right, that's the prevailing theory you hear.
But the big question is there actual solid proof that eating more LA or having higher levels inside you directly causes more inflammation? Is that link really there?
Well, it's really insightful to look at where the data for this particular study came from. It's the Framingham Offspring Study.
Framingham. That rings a bell. Big name in health research, right?
Huge. This isn't just any old study group.
Yeah.
It's incredibly significant, highly trusted. It started way back in 1971 following the kids of the people in the original Framingham Heart Study.
Wow. Okay, so decades of data.
Decades. It gives us these amazing long-term insights into chronic disease, risk factors, prevention. Its rigor and just the sheer length of time make it super reliable for understanding long-term health, especially for heart and metabolic stuff.
Okay, so they have this incredible data set. How did they use it to look at this omega-6 and inflammation question specifically? What was the setup?
So the study design itself, it was what we call cross-sectional.
Meaning, like a snapshot in time.
Exactly. They took blood samples from about 2,700 people. And in those same samples, they measured the levels of LA and also another omega-6 called arachidonic acid, or AA.
Okay, LA and AA levels.
Right. And at the same time, in those same samples, they measured 10 different biomarkers related to inflammation and oxidation.
10 different markers. Got it. So looking at everything together at one point.
Precisely. A broad snapshot across a large group.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, I think, especially for you listening, because just measuring things isn't enough, right? Lots of things can affect inflammation.
Oh, definitely. That's always the challenge. Confounding factors.
Right. So what did the researchers do about that? Did they account for other stuff?
They did. And this is crucial. They statistically controlled for a whole bunch of other things that could muddy the waters.
Like what?
Well, things like age, race, sex, whether people smoked, their blood lipid levels, blood pressure, even body weight. They adjusted for all of that.
Wow. So they really tried to isolate the effect of just the LA and AA.
That was the goal, yeah. To get as clean a picture as possible of the direct relationship between these fatty acids and inflammation markers. A serious effort to remove bias.
Okay, so with all that careful work, controlling for all those factors, what did they actually find? What was the connection between LA and inflammation? Well, here's the kicker. The results for LA. Higher levels were actually linked to significantly lower levels of 5 out of the 10 inflammation markers.
Lower, not higher.
Lower. And maybe just as importantly, in no single case was higher LA associated with higher levels of any inflammation marker. None.
Huh. Okay. What about AA, the other omega-6?
Similar story there. Higher AA levels were tied to lower concentrations of 4 of the markers. And again, just like LA, absolutely no significant link between higher AA and more inflammation or oxidation.
So, across the board, higher omega-6 levels measured in the blood seem to correlate with less inflammation, not more.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a clear signal in this large group.
Yeah. And what's really compelling here is hearing it directly from one of the study investigators, Dr. William S. Harris. He summed it up very clearly.
Oh, what did he say?
He said, and I'm quoting here, "These new data show clearly that people who have the highest levels of LA and AA in their blood are in a less inflammatory state than people with lower levels."
A less inflammatory state.
Exactly. And he goes on, "This finding is exactly the opposite of what one would expect if omega-6 fatty acids were pro-inflammatory. In fact, they appear to be anti-inflammatory."
Wow. Anti-inflammatory. That's basically flipping the common narrative completely upside down, isn't it?
It really is a direct contradiction to that popular story.
Okay, that statement from Dr. Harris, that finding, it's a big one. So what does this all mean then, like, for dietary advice? Because, like me, I'm sure many listening have heard countless times, cut back on seed oils, lower your omega-6.
Right. That's the logical next question. If these findings hold up, what should we actually be doing? Well, Dr. Harris didn't mince words on that either. He specifically addressed the common advice.
Yeah.
He said basically, in the flurry of news stories about the harms of seed oils, the primary sources of LA in the diet, many voices are calling for reducing Americans' intakes of LA. But then he adds, this is not a science-based recommendation.
Not science-based. Wow.
And this study, in addition to many more, point in precisely the opposite direction. Instead of lowering LA intakes, raising intakes appears to be a healthier recommendation.
Raising intake, so the exact opposite of what we usually hear.
Pretty much. It's quite a strong statement based on these findings and, as he notes, other existing research too. It feels like, for years people might have been carefully swapping out certain oils thinking they were reducing inflammation, but maybe the science pointed elsewhere all along.
Huh. That's quite something to process.
And it connects to a broader point he made, which I think is really important. He said these findings contradict a narrative, not previous research findings.
Okay, hang on. Contradict a narrative, not the research. What's the difference there?
It's a crucial distinction. He stressed that many studies in the medical literature are consistent with our findings here. So his point is that the popular story about seed oils being bad is what's wrong, not necessarily the bulk of the scientific investigation that's already been done.
I see. So the widespread belief or the headline version got separated from what multiple studies were actually indicating.
That seems to be what he's suggesting. The narrative took off, perhaps, even when a body of evidence was pointing differently, or was, at least, much more nuanced.
That makes so much sense. And for you, listening, it really underscores why digging a bit deeper than the headlines is so important, right? Why looking at studies like this one in nutrients matters more than just accepting a story that's maybe gone viral.
Absolutely. Understanding that difference between a popular narrative and the actual accumulated scientific evidence is key.
Okay, so just to quickly recap that aha moment, that really surprising core finding from this deep dive into the Framingham data. Higher levels of these omega-6s, LA, and AA were actually linked with having less inflammation.
Less, yeah. Totally counter to that dominant narrative we talked about.
Mind-blowing, really.
Which, it really brings up an important question for you, for anyone listening. When you come across health information, maybe dietary advice, especially if it sounds really dramatic or certain,
Yeah.
do you find yourself checking it out? Like trying to find the actual studies behind it? Or is it easier sometimes to just, go with the flow of the story everyone seems to be telling?
That's a good question to ask ourselves. It's easy to get caught up. So here's a final thought to maybe chew on, building on that. Given how incredibly persistent these health narratives can become, right, like this anti-seed oil story, even when solid scientific evidence, like this Framingham study, seems to point the other way, how might this deep dive maybe influence how you approach health info from now on? How you decide what's truly an informed decision for your own health and well-being? Something to think about.